posting this here because I needed to get this out. For no other reason than writing it down has helped get it out of my head, even for an hour or so. Taxi driving has always been a strange job when you really think about it. You spend your entire shift allowing complete strangers into your car. Most of the time, you are alone. A lot of the time, it is late at night. You pick people up from places you have never been, take them down roads you do not know, and sometimes end up sitting outside houses in neighborhoods you would normally have absolutely no reason to visit. When you dissect the whole thing, it sounds mad. I have been driving taxis for just over 11 years now, and I have had pretty much every type of passenger you can imagine. Drunks, people crying after breakups, couples arguing, people who fall asleep and become impossible to wake up, businessmen who spend the entire journey shouting into their phones, teenagers trying to cram 6 people into a car designed for 4. I once drove a man 23 miles before he realized he had given me the address of his old house. I have been threatened a few times too. Nothing particularly dramatic, thankfully. A guy once grabbed my shirt because I refused to let him smoke in the car. Another one kicked my passenger door so hard, he dented it after his card declined. Years ago, you also had the constant worry about carrying cash. Before card payments became the norm, every driver had money on them. Sometimes hundreds by the end of a busy Friday or Saturday night. Everyone knew it too. You were basically driving around at 2 in the morning with a sign saying there was cash somewhere inside the vehicle. Since card payments and app bookings became standard, that danger has reduced massively. I barely carry cash anymore. I honestly thought the job had become safer. Then something happened that made me realize there are worse things someone can steal from you than money. The scariest thing that has ever happened to me as a taxi driver was not a physical assault. Nobody pulled a gun. Nobody held a knife to my throat. Nobody robbed me. It was something much more devious than that. And the worst part is that for months I had absolutely no idea it was happening. Looking back, the man responsible was almost aggressively forgettable. That sounds strange, but it is the best way I can describe him. There was nothing about him that stood out. Average height, average build, dark jacket, short hair. No tattoos that I noticed. No unusual accent. No distinctive smell. No strange behavior when he first got into the car. If you asked me to describe 10 random passengers from that year, he would not have made the list. I picked him up through the app one evening. It was not particularly late. Somewhere around 9, I think. The journey was maybe 20 minutes. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. He sat in the back and looked at his phone. Then he asked me a question. Mind if I put this light on for a second? He meant the small roof light above the rear seats. Go ahead. Passengers use it all the time. Looking for dropped keys, checking wallets, reading something. I did not care. He switched it on. A few seconds later, I heard clicking. Then more clicking. I glanced in the rearview mirror. He had both hands around the light fitting. Everything all right? Yeah, buttons sticking. I remember seeing him pushing at the plastic housing with his thumb. For maybe 10 or 15 seconds, he was messing around with the whole thing. I actually started slowing down because I thought he might have broken it. You want me to pull over? No, got it. The light went off, then on, then off again. Working. Yeah, sorry, mate. That was it. I dropped him off a few minutes later. He thanked me. I drove away, and I forgot him. Completely. Months passed. Then, one Tuesday morning, two police detectives knocked on my front door. I genuinely thought someone in my family had died. You do not expect detectives at your house at 9 in the morning for anything good. They asked my name, asked if I was a licensed taxi driver. Then they asked if I still owned a particular vehicle and read out my registration. That was the moment I started getting nervous. I said yes. They asked if they could come inside. One of them did most of the talking. He started asking about my working hours, which apps I used, whether anyone else drove my car, whether I ever lent it to friends. Then came a question I will never forget. Have you ever followed a female passenger home after completing a journey? I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. It was that shocked little laugh you do when somebody asks something so ridiculous that your brain does not immediately know how to process it. No. He stared at me. Never. Absolutely never. Then they started putting things on my dining table. Printed maps, dates, journey receipts, booking records, addresses. They explained that my taxi had appeared in connection with a number of serious sexual assault investigations. I am deliberately not going to describe what happened to those women. It is not my story to sensationalize, and I have since learned enough about what they went through to know that they deserve more respect than becoming horror story details on the internet. But the basic pattern was terrifying. A woman would book a taxi, my taxi. I would collect her. I would take her home. Then, sometime afterwards, somebody would target that address. Several victims lived alone. A couple had been attacked shortly after returning from nights out. One incident happened less than an hour after I had dropped the woman off. I felt sick. The police had compared reports, mobile data, camera footage, and taxi records. My registration kept appearing. Not at the assaults themselves, but before them, again and again and again. I think there were 7 cases they believed might be connected at that stage. 7. I knew what it looked like. I could see it on their faces, too. They were professional, but I knew why they were sitting in my house. I was a suspect. I started talking too fast. I told them to take my phone, take my laptop, check my location history, check every message I had ever sent. Search the car. Search my house. I probably sounded guilty just because I was panicking so much. One of them asked if they could examine the taxi. I practically threw the keys at him. They took the car away that afternoon. For the next 2 days, I barely slept. Every terrible possibility went through my head. What if somebody had cloned my number plate? What if another driver had accessed my account? What if there was some coincidence the police simply would not believe? Then they called me. They had found something. I went to the station expecting another interrogation. Instead, one of the detectives placed a small plastic object inside an evidence bag on the table. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. Then he explained. It was a miniature camera, a tiny Wi-Fi-enabled device that had been concealed inside the rear roof light housing and wired into the car's electrical supply. The lens looked through a gap in the plastic so small I had never noticed it. It was positioned to see the back seat and, more importantly, through the windows. Whoever had installed it could remotely access the feed. When the detective explained that, something clicked in my brain. The roof light, the man. I could suddenly see him again. His hands around the fitting, his thumb pressing the plastic. buttons sticking. I told them everything. They went through my booking history. It took a while to narrow it down because I carried dozens of passengers some weeks, but eventually we found the journey. His account details were still there. That was the breakthrough. What the police eventually told me made the whole thing somehow worse. The man had installed the camera in my taxi and had been accessing it remotely. For months, he had effectively turned me into an unwilling surveillance service. He would watch my journeys. Whenever I collected a woman who caught his attention, he could watch where we went. He could see where I stopped. If she was dropped outside a house, he had an address. Sometimes he could apparently pick up pieces of conversation too. A passenger telling me she lived alone. Someone saying her flatmate was away. Someone mentioning they had forgotten their keys before remembering where they were. Normal little fragments of conversation. Things nobody would think twice about saying to a taxi driver. He was collecting them. According to the police, he did not target every woman he watched. That would have made the pattern too obvious. He selected people, studied locations, waited. I still struggle with that part. The patience, the calculation. The fact that he could sit somewhere watching my car, move around the city and decide, based on a few minutes of footage, whether somebody looked vulnerable enough. The police arrested him. I will not give his name because I do not want the victims identified through association, but they found enough evidence that I was completely ruled out. You would think that would have been the end of it for me. It was not. At first, I was angry about how close I had come to having my life destroyed. I kept imagining my photograph in the newspapers. Local taxi driver, predator of young women. People do not always remember the word suspect. They remember your face. I have a family, friends, neighbors, regular customers. Even if I was later cleared, something like that sticks to you. But eventually, another thought started bothering me even more. That camera had been there for months, which meant he had not only been watching passengers, he had been watching me. Every shift, every conversation, every stupid thing you do when you think you are alone. Me singing badly to the radio. Me talking to my wife on speakerphone. Arguments, private conversations, phone calls with my doctor. Me sitting in the car eating lunch. Me crying one night after finding out an old friend had died. All of it potentially watched by some stranger. I cannot properly explain how violating that feels. Your car becomes a strange kind of private space when you drive for a living. It is your office, your break room, and sometimes the only place you get 5 minutes alone. Finding out that somebody had secretly been sitting there with me the entire time changed something in my head. I still drive. I could not afford to simply quit. But every morning before starting work, I inspect the car. Roof lights, dashboard, seats, USB ports. Underneath the steering column, boot, everything. I probably look paranoid. Maybe I am. I even paid a garage to remove half the interior trim after everything happened because I became convinced there could be another device somewhere. There was not. Still, I check. People sometimes ask taxi drivers what our worst nightmare is. Robbery, drunk passengers, getting attacked. Honestly, give me the old-fashioned problems. Take the cash. Punch me in the face. Steal the car if you have to. Bones heal. Cars can be replaced. Money can be earned again. What that man did was different. He sat quietly in the back of my taxi for 20 minutes, touched one little light above his head and turned me into an accomplice without me ever knowing it. He used my job, my car, my face, my passengers' trust. And for months, every time I thought I was driving alone, there was somebody else there with me, watching. I do not think I will ever completely get over that.
None of the stories you hear on this channel come from third-party sources. No Reddit, Google, or YouTube copypasta. They are all original writing by me. Keeping up with the writing can be difficult, but seeing this small channel grow into a small community makes it so worth it. If you like the stories, please like and subscribe and join us. Your support helps me keep the channel going. Thanks so much.
The following story isn't actually mine. It's my aunt's. It happened sometime in the mid-1990s, when she was 19 years old, and it's one of those stories that everyone in my family knows. I heard it for the first time when I was probably 10 or 11, then again as a teenager, then several more times as an adult. The details have changed slightly over the years, as family stories tend to do, but the important parts have never changed. Especially the part about what the driver said to her. "You're mine now." If you're younger, it's probably hard to appreciate how different getting a taxi used to be. There were no apps, no little photograph of your driver, no registration number appearing on your phone, no GPS map showing exactly where you were going. Where my aunt lived, there were basically 3 ways to get a cab. You could walk to a taxi rank and wait. You could phone a taxi company using a number you either knew by heart, found in the yellow pages, or got from one of those faded business cards that seemed to be pinned to the wall of every bar, restaurant, and convenience store. Or, probably the most common method, you stood at the side of the road, stuck your arm out, and flagged one down. That was what my aunt did. She doesn't even remember where she was going anymore. Some party, appointment, dinner, or event that was apparently extremely important to a 19-year-old at the time and completely irrelevant 30 years later. What she does remember is that she was late. She'd been walking quickly along a fairly busy road when she saw a car approaching with what looked like a taxi sign on the roof. She raised her arm. The car slowed down. That was mistake number 1. According to my aunt, the car should have immediately set alarm bells ringing. It was an old sedan, faded dark blue or possibly black, with rust around the wheel arches and a mismatched rear passenger door. The roof sign looked homemade, literally just a plastic box with taxi written across it. Back then, people sometimes used a phrase for illegal taxis that definitely wouldn't be considered acceptable today: a gypsy cab. Basically, an unlicensed taxi. Sometimes it was exactly what it appeared to be: some guy using his own car to make a bit of cash on the side. Best case scenario, you got a cheap ride home. Worst case scenario, you voluntarily climbed into a stranger's car. My aunt opened the rear passenger door and got inside. She told the driver where she was going. He nodded. Then he pulled away. Within maybe 5 seconds, my aunt realized something was seriously wrong. The first thing she noticed was the door. There was no interior handle. Not a broken handle. No handle. The entire fitting had been removed. She looked across at the other rear door. Same thing. No handle. Then she noticed the plastic. Most of the rear interior had been covered in thick, dirty, transparent plastic sheeting. The backs of the front seats, sections of the doors, and even parts of the floor were covered with it. There was no meter, no radio equipment, no driver identification, nothing. My aunt says she went from mildly uncomfortable to absolutely terrified in about 3 seconds. The driver must have noticed her looking around. He was probably somewhere in his 30s. Thin face, dark hair. Nothing particularly memorable about him except his eyes. She says they looked excited, like he was enjoying waiting for her to figure it out. He looked at her through the rearview mirror. Then he turned his head slightly. He smiled and said, "You're mine now." My aunt froze. Then the driver lifted one hand slightly from his lap. There was a knife resting across his thigh. Not some huge movie-style weapon, just an ordinary kitchen knife, which somehow makes the story worse to me. Now, this is where I need to explain my grandfather. My granddad served in the U.S. Army Special Forces and had spent time in Vietnam and elsewhere during his military career. He came away from those experiences with a slightly pessimistic view of humanity. His philosophy was basically that most people were perfectly decent, but the problem was, you never knew when you were going to meet the one who wasn't. And one bad person could change your life forever. He had 2 daughters, my mother and my aunt, and he refused to let either of them grow up completely helpless. They weren't martial arts experts. They weren't trained assassins. He simply taught them some basic defensive techniques, situational awareness, and, more importantly, the mentality that if somebody ever tried to abduct them, they should fight immediately. Scream, run, break things, attract attention. Never allow yourself to be taken somewhere quieter if you can possibly prevent it. He also insisted they carry something they could protect themselves with. My aunt had 2 things with her that day: a small can of pepper spray and a heavy multi-tool attached to her keys. The multi-tool had a small pocket knife, screwdriver heads, and, importantly, a short blunt metal section that my grandfather had once demonstrated could be used to strike a car window. My aunt was terrified. She has always been very clear about that. Whenever somebody calls her brave for what happened next, she says she wasn't brave. She thought she was about to die. The driver looked at her through the mirror again. "You understand me?" he said. My aunt reached slowly into her bag. He apparently smiled even wider. Maybe he thought she was going for money. Instead, she wrapped her hand around the pepper spray. She pulled it out. The driver saw it. His expression changed. My aunt smiled back at him. "I'm not yours," she said. Then she raised the can. "But this is," and emptied it. Not one quick spray, the entire can. She held the button down and blasted it towards the front of the car. The driver screamed. The car swerved instantly. Pepper spray inside a confined car, by the way, affects pretty much everybody. Within seconds, my aunt's own eyes were burning. She was coughing and struggling to breathe. But she could still see enough to grab the multi-tool. The driver was shouting. Some of it was profanity. Some of it was threats. He was trying to wipe his eyes with one hand while steering with the other. The car mounted the curb briefly before dropping back onto the road. My aunt started hammering the metal tool against the rear passenger window. The first hit did nothing. The second cracked it. The driver screamed at her to stop. She hit it again. The glass shattered. Air rushed into the car. My aunt immediately moved across the back seat and started smashing the other window. She didn't know if she could actually climb out of a moving car. She didn't know how fast they were traveling. She didn't care. She just knew she wasn't staying inside. The driver was almost completely blinded at this point. The taxi drifted across the road, clipped something, possibly another car, and then left the roadway. My aunt remembers seeing a brick wall through the broken window, then impact. The car hit it hard enough to throw her into the back of the passenger seat. The driver's face apparently hit the steering wheel. For several seconds, everything went quiet. My aunt genuinely thought she'd been knocked unconscious, although it was probably only disorientation from the crash. Her ears were ringing. Her face hurt. Her eyes were burning from the pepper spray. Then she heard shouting outside. People were running towards the car. The crash had happened in a fairly populated area and attracted immediate attention. And unbelievably, almost like something written for a movie, one of the vehicles approaching from the opposite direction was a police cruiser. The officers saw the car leave the road. They stopped. My aunt started screaming, "Get me out!" She was kicking at one of the damaged rear doors, even though there was still no handle. One officer came to her side, while the other went towards the driver. The driver had recovered enough to start moving. According to my aunt, the knife was still somewhere near his legs. The officer saw it. He immediately pulled his weapon and ordered the driver to show his hands. My aunt remembers him shouting something like, "Don't move! Don't touch it!" The driver initially ignored him. Then he apparently realized there were now several witnesses standing around watching. He raised his hands. The officers eventually opened the rear door from the outside and pulled my aunt free. She was taken to hospital mostly as a precaution. She had bruising across one side of her body, a minor cut from the broken glass, and extremely irritated eyes from the pepper spray. Nothing serious, physically anyway. The driver was arrested. This is where the details of the story get a little vague because my aunt hates talking about the legal aftermath. My grandparents obviously became involved. Police took statements and investigators examined the car. My aunt says the police were very concerned by the modifications inside it. The missing door handles, the plastic covering, the fact that the driver apparently had no legitimate taxi license, and, obviously, the knife. Whatever explanation he gave for those things apparently wasn't very convincing. My grandfather was furious, not at my aunt, at himself. Apparently he sat beside her hospital bed and kept saying he should have taught her more. My aunt finally told him something along the lines of, "You taught me enough." That story became family legend. Not in a funny way, more like a cautionary tale. We heard it before going out with friends, before learning to drive, before traveling, before moving away from home. Granddad would occasionally bring it up whenever one of us complained about him being overly protective. "Your aunt thought she was getting a taxi once." That was usually all he had to say. And even now, decades later, my aunt is obsessive about checking cars. She checks license plates. She checks drivers. She checks door handles. If she uses a rideshare app, she makes sure every detail matches before she gets inside. She also sits in the back. Always. I once asked her what she thinks would have happened if she hadn't had that pepper spray. She went quiet for a while. Then she said something I've never forgotten. The knife wasn't what scared me most. I asked what she meant. She said it was the plastic. Because knives can be used to threaten somebody. But you don't cover the inside of your car in plastic on impulse. You do that beforehand. You prepare it. You expect something to happen. Maybe there was some innocent explanation for it. Maybe there wasn't. My aunt has absolutely no interest in finding out. She survived because she noticed something was wrong quickly, because somebody had taught her not to freeze when she was threatened, and probably more than anything, because she was incredibly lucky. The crash could have been worse. The pepper spray could have failed. The knife could have been within easier reach. The police car could have been 2 streets away, instead of passing at exactly the right moment. Any one of those things changes, and maybe our family tells a very different story. Or maybe we never know the story at all. My grandfather is an old man now. But whenever the grandchildren or great-grandchildren are old enough to start going places alone, he still gives roughly the same speech. Know where you are, know who you're with, pay attention to exits, and if somebody tries to take you somewhere against your will, make as much noise and chaos as humanly possible. People occasionally laugh when they hear how serious he is about it. Nobody in our family does. Because sometime in the mid-90s, my 19-year-old aunt climbed into what she thought was a taxi. A stranger showed her a knife. He smiled at her and said, "You're mine now." And fortunately for my aunt, he had picked the wrong 19-year-old.